This is going to be a brief introduction to Storyville, which was the red light district of New Orleans from 1897 to 1917. It was closed down by the U.S. military. They thought that it was a danger to the soldiers that were stationed in New Orleans. It went on, though, after it was officially closed. Those madams and prostitutes still plied their trade, and it probably didn't end until about 1925. And there was a blue book you could get, and it was went all over the country. And the blue book described each house of prostitution and what they had to offer. So there was one that had, ladies of many lands. So they had Chinese girls, Jewish girls, black girls. They weren't really from many lands. They were New Orleans girls that they just used because they were ethnic. Some of the madams made a lot of money. There's one particular madam we'll talk about later that became very rich, and she bought a lot of real estate in New Orleans, and she retired very fat and happy at an advanced age. For the girls, it was not always so pleasant. There was disease. 1917, there was no penicillin. So if they got syphilis, they had to take a strange mercury compound that made them sick and affected their liver and kidneys. The practice of prostitutes was you would come in to the room and they would make you stand up by the sink and they would wash your member, your penis. And they would also, at the same time, they would inspect it, see if there was any sores or anything that was disturbing about it. Then you would get into bed with the prostitute, and there would be a towel on top of the bedspread, and that was so that any secretions that you emitted or the woman emitted would be absorbed. They had a laundry service and laundered these towels. Now, there were all levels of prostitution. You could pay as little as $2. You could pay as much as $250, which was a fortune in those days. And there's a movie called Pretty Baby, which was shot in New Orleans, but not in Storyville, because Storyville itself does not exist anymore. There's no trace of it. They've completely obliterated it. So if you're as a tourist, you want to come to Storyville, you're not going to see anything, not even a trace of it. But they shot it up in Uptown. They shot it at a place called the Columns Hotel and in other locations in Uptown New Orleans. And the movie made a star out of Brooke Shields, and she was only about 14 years old when the movie was made, and she did such a good job of playing a young woman who was supposedly a virgin that the story of the movie Pretty Baby was that they were auctioning off her virginity. And she was quite young, and there was a lot of controversy about the movie to have a 14-year-old girl playing a prostitute. And nevertheless, the movie was made and it was shown, and as I said, it made a star out of Brooke Shields. Before that, she was just a kind of a child model. And she went on to do this controversial ad for Calvin Klein jeans in which she said, "There's nothing between me and my Calvins." meaning she wasn't wearing any underwear. So that was Brooke Shields, and she didn't have much of a career after that. She made a few movies, and she had a TV show where she had Kathy Griffin on, I think. It's pretty crappy, and it doesn't. Nobody reruns it anymore. And the other thing about Storyville to know is that some of the girls were really exploited. So some of them would have died young. They would have caught diseases, or just the wear and tear of having to have sex with 15, 18, 20 men a night. It's very traumatic for a woman to have that many different partners. And the high class prostitutes did quite well. I mean, if they were charging $50 for their services, they might get 20, and $20 was a lot of money in 1917. So they could spend it on clothes, they could spend it on travel. You could go home to mama, wherever she was, usually somewhere in Louisiana or Mississippi, maybe, Texas. And, prostitutes usually did not say that they were prostitutes when their relatives asked them what they did. But it was pretty obvious because they had no education, yet they had made a lot of money, and they dressed in an extravagant way, which some people would say dressed like a floozy. And that's what they were. If you look up the definition of floozy, then you'll find that it means a woman of loose morals. Anyway, as I said, the U.S. Army closed the thing down, and it was very traumatic. A lot of people were put out of work because there were not only the prostitutes, but Storyville was the place where jazz originated. So they had these piano players down in the parlor where you would come in. You would come in, and there would be the girls would be lined up, maybe perhaps up the stairs, and they would line up, and you would choose one of them, and you'd take them up to a room, and the rooms were usually quite small. They just had a bed and a sink for that. What I talked about earlier, the process of washing your penis before you and inspecting your penis before you went to bed with the woman. And it was not much of a life for a woman. Most of them were trying to get out of it, and sometimes they would marry the Johns, and that was a great thing. Among the other prostitutes, they would say, Helen married one of her Johns, and they moved to Baton Rouge, and they were very happy. The Madams also often married someone because they had these prominent rich men coming in, and if they took a liking to the Madam, they might marry them. Part of the reason they married them was just to piss off their family. They would, they might be from Lafayette, Louisiana. They'd come to New Orleans, marry a madam, and bring them back to Lafayette. But one thing you can say for a madam, she knows a lot about sex. And so when you went to bed with her, she probably did a good job. And we're going to talk at length about Storyville. He has a copy of the Blue Book, listed all the houses and what they had to offer, and some idea of the prices, I think. And we'll discuss that. And he is an expert on New Orleans history. I'm also going to be doing an episode with him on probably 3 episodes on the New Orleans slave market, which existed up until 1861, when the Union soldiers occupied New Orleans, and for some reason, they didn't want to sell slaves. And then we have another episode with Vernon on the Creole culture, The Creole culture is what happened was the original settlers of New Orleans, some of them were quite rich and aristocratic, and they would have a regular family, a white family, if you like, a French family or Spanish family, and they would also on the side they would have a Negro mistress, and they would have children by her. Those children, which were of mixed race, came to be called the Creole children. There's other definitions of Creole, but this means the people of mixed race. And they had their own culture, and they had a way of telling who was belonged and who didn't belong. So it was whether you were the color of a paper bag. If you were the color of a paper bag or lighter, then you were a Creole. If you were darker than the color of a paper bag, then you were a Negro, and you were undesirable. And the Creoles were responsible for a lot of industry. They had haberdashery shops. They had sewing shops. They had all kinds of industry, mostly by women. The women of the Creole culture were more industrious than the men. And they were free people of color. They were not slaves. And they may have owned slaves. Some of them owned slaves. But they were, people were amazed when they came to New Orleans and they saw that these dark-skinned people going around as if they were white people, because they had all the rights of a white person. They were a free person of color. Although they weren't accepted in white society, they had their own society. So they had their own hotels, they had their own dance halls, restaurants, bars, and they did not mix with white people. But white people used their services, such as they would use a dressmaker. They'd come down and get fitted for dresses, and the Creole woman would make their dresses. Some of them became prostitutes, and the white men, preferred them to the white women, or they thought it was more get a little variety in your life, And that's about all I'm going to say about it right now. Vernon Palmer is going to be with me for the next 3 to 5 episodes, and he knows everything to know about 3 topics: the Creole culture, the New Orleans slave market, and Storyville. As I say, it'll be the next 3 to 5 episodes, and they'll be quite long. These episodes are going to be from 35 to 45 minutes long with Vernon Palmer. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening. And we're going to wrap up now. And I hope you'll stay with us. We're going to have over 100 episodes. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.